Dahl, and I am the Hillcrest resident, and I am the chair of the committee.
Zach, Hillcrest Mission Hills.
Gail Freed, Hillcrest.
Clint Daniels.
Amy Hayes, Bankers Hill.
Matt Medeiros in Hillcrest.
Hi, Brer Marsh.
Mary McKenzie, Hillcrest.
Okay, the agenda for tonight is the city staff has prepared a bunch of information on open spaces and things of that nature. I'll let Michael sort of introduce and explain where we're going.
Yeah, thank you. Excuse me. Okay, good evening, everyone. Michael Prince with the City of San Diego Planning Department. We got a full team here on our end. Looking forward to in-depth discussion on public spaces and public space opportunities. I'm gonna turn it over to Scott Sandell. If you could pull up the PowerPoint, please.
Of course.
And we'll go ahead and get started.
There you go.
So yeah, so tonight we really want to talk about opportunities in the public realm and public space and parks opportunities. We've got the presentation will be led primarily by myself with Scott Sandell and Brad. Actually, Brad and Scott really did all of the work, but I'm happy to take all of the credit. And then we also have our mobility team here, Diego Velasco with City Thinker and Gabriela Folino with Diet and Batia. So a lot of our team members are here and subject matter experts if we get into the weeds on any particular topics related to public space design or mobility, but the focus again is really on the public space and public realm opportunities. So I think we've already gone through and done a little bit of introductions. The next step is to provide an overview of the community feedback on public spaces. Most people here in the room have heard all of this stuff before, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, and then I'll turn it over to Scott and Brad to discuss the public realms, parks, and public space concepts and the framework around that. And then we're going to open it up for subcommittee and public comment. You know, obviously we'll turn it over to the chair to decide sort of how he wants to do it, but we anticipate that this is sort of an iterative discussion and allows the full community and the group to really provide back and forth feedback. As always, if you have questions, you know, please feel free to put them in the chat while we're going through this, and we can address them once we get into the comment period as well. That's one of the nice things about this format as well. So again, purpose of tonight is to provide an overview of public realm, parks, and public space concepts, discuss the opportunities by public space typology, provide feedback to guide the design of new public spaces and parks in Hillcrest, and then public space concept development and refinement based on the community input is really sort of our next step and our takeaway from this meeting in terms of where we're looking to go. So, you know, everyone's heard the objectives before, but really what we're focusing on tonight is creating public spaces and parks that connect people to businesses and services and the places that we want to recreate and that we want to hang out in. This is a component of the broader objectives of addressing our housing needs, supporting the local business community in Hillcrest, celebrating the LGBTQ+ community, and strengthening connections. Next slide. So the plan itself is an amendment to the Uptown Community Plan. That is what we will be doing, is utilizing the community plan as the framework, the policy framework, and addressing the broader Hillcrest and medical complex neighborhoods. We want to identify mobility and public space enhancements that provide better connections and recreation opportunities in the community. In terms of the meeting input that we heard from, in particular, the July Uptown meeting was to address pedestrian infrastructure, expand the normal street promenade, and emphasize good urban design. When we went forward with the Planning Commission workshop, and we discussed this previously, but two key components were to look at increasing plazas, linear street parks, and the tree canopy, as well as reducing street parking to provide the right-of-way for other users. We've had two documents that we've released for public review and that are on the website planhillcrest.org, the community survey report and the existing conditions atlas. We'll touch on a couple of those components tonight before we get into some of the typologies. So we had the robust survey that had just under 800 responses on the public realm. And we had really 5 main categories of input that we received. And that was sort of seeing streets for people and looking to have emphasis on biking and walking, looking at the opportunity to reutilize surface parking for parks and plazas, emphasizing urban trails and creating connections between Balboa Park and in the Hillcrest community, emphasizing mixed-use development and joint use of our school facilities as well. And so we'll touch on some of those components tonight. You know, in the public realm survey, one of the things that we were able to do was create sort of a place-based priority. And so each individual person could place a dot where it was most needed. And as we discussed previously, really the main emphasis were 5th and 6th Avenue, between University and Robinson, as well as Normal Street between University and Lincoln as the sort of the highest priority areas. And in terms of how that space should be identified, the plurality, or the 34% of the people wanted it to be utilized for parks and green space. Scott, next slide.
Yeah,
Oh,
my
sorry.
slide here. Thanks, Michael. I'll take over for the next few slides here. Again, my name is Scott Sandell. I'm a parks planner with the Parks and Open Spaces Division of the Planning Department. I'm a Uptown resident for the last 20-something years or so, and 15 years prior to that lived in North Park and Golden Hill. So I'm familiar with the neighborhood and community. This is a recap, basically, of some of the stuff we talked about this last meeting or two. In particular, these spaces here are private spaces that the public gets to use. And I think that'll come to play in Uptown quite a bit. Another recap is that we talked about outdoor dining in the right-of-way. That's really what we're all about right now, right? In the period of COVID. And we have some really good examples, especially here in University Heights. Some real good design excellence in action here in our community. From that discussion of the public realm and dining in the public right-of-way, I wanted to touch on a few things that I wanted to throw at you, so to speak, that might expand the conversation. In particular, here, this example here, this is in LA, where it's more like a food hall. Instead of a single use in the right-of-way, it's more of a communal use for public dining. And then a little sketch here of what might be off to the side could be retail. Another example, just to get everybody thinking about other uses in the public right-of-way, or this example of, instead of just a single gym or yoga studio having their own particular outdoor function, here's an example which would be more communal and more like a parklet, where there'd be games and maybe an artist might be involved with the design of it. But I wanted to kind of take a broad view and say that clearly we're not starting from scratch. I don't know if everybody else remembers, but I was on the committee in 2016 for the community plan update. And as a result of that document, there's some really good parks strategies and policies to build upon. And it spoke to public space and private space and how public spaces could be in the private realm, and then many different policies that we can pick from. We can come back to that slide too, and come back to some of the things that are in the existing community plan that we can use in the focus plan area. But I wanted to stress that for parks, because we can work on our connections to parks, we can draw upon the overall Uptown for parks. And I wanted to get into it a little bit about some of the things that are key that are in the existing community plan that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, right? But I wanted to just highlight some of these things so that everybody can kind of have it fresh in their mind when we try to get some feedback from you folks. Starting here at the Northeast, there's some really good facilities that we have planned and some that are existing. In particular, we're coming soon for the Normal Street Promenade. We're all with bated breath to see that begin. So it should be interesting, and it'll be a real draw for this particular part of the kind of section of Hillcrest there. And then in the Northwest, I wanted to highlight a few things that happen. Grant School Joint Use, Raynard Way Neighborhood Park, and some of the trails areas that we're starting to look at. And then further south, in particular in Bankers Hill and the areas that are adjacent to Balboa Park, there's the 6th Avenue Linear Park. A couple rec centers are called out for it, and a few facilities, again, with the West Maple Canyon zone, including newly built stuff like Waterman Park on Maple Street, which is a really great example. I don't know, I think it's a really great example. I wasn't the designer involved at all, but I'm really pleased to see that we have some wonderful spaces that are crafted that take advantage of its relationship to nature and the canyons. And also coming soon, Olive Street Mini Park, which will be a more, I wouldn't say standard park, but it's a park that has a lot of different features, play area, multi-use lawn, and a lot of different things. So that'll be coming soon too. And I wanted to touch on now, as we leave to kind of leave what's been in the plan, I wanted to just say that I think public spaces and parks should definitely reflect what is great about Hillcrest. So I think there's so much to draw from in terms of character and look and feel of things and meaning and places and identity. And with that, I'll pass the torch off to Brad Lentz, and he can go over a few of the public realm typologies.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Scott. I'm Brad Lentz, principal with Spurlock Landscape Architects, and I'm a planner and a landscape architect, so I kind of wear both hats from sort of big picture to implementing parks and open spaces as well. And we really think it's important to sort of look at various typologies in this sort of more urban kind of neighborhood than as we're sort of looking at density and how you sort of create a full sort of public realm network that includes a series of sort of different types of sort of parks and open spaces. Just sort of looking at, this is sort of a quick overview, just showing all of these kind of various types and how they, occur. We're not sort of suggesting that they're all going to occur within sort of one singular project, but we realize that it needs to sort of spread out, throughout the community. But this kind of quickly shows how some of these elements might be addressed or implemented, on a project by project basis. And we'll talk about each one a little bit more in detail. The first thing we wanted to talk about is sort of, streets and alleys. I think we've heard quite a bit about sort of, existing sidewalks and sidewalk cafe seating, in the previous meetings and from Scott's conversations and parklets. We also wanted to touch a little bit on sort of residential street frontages and alleyways. If you want to jump to the next slide. And sort of just thinking about sort of small scale interventions that, there's opportunity for sort of urban greening and providing, additional landscape and trees and urban canopy, in sidewalks. Really is important to think about things as we're developing, reducing curb cuts so that you actually get sort of wide sidewalks. Thinking about areas, also looking at, alleys, a great example of what's already been done at 5th and University, or just south of University by the Hillcrest sign, with the new improvements on the murals and the catenary lights to really sort of bring some life and vibrancy to that space. But then also thinking about other existing alleyways, that there's some opportunity where there's setbacks between the alley and the building, where these could be utilized for sort of courtyards or other areas and examples. And there's a lot of other examples that other places and cities and places have used alleys. If you want to flip to the next slide, Scott. That alleyways can be used as sort of connectors or trails. They can be improved with art or have sort of small seating opportunities, or become sort of these urban trails that are off of busier streets. And this just shows a couple examples. Or they can be much more active spaces, as you're sort of seeing, cafe dining, seating, if there's adjacent land uses that really could activate these spaces and provide an opportunity to have them actually be places where people linger and gather. The next sort of typology that we were kind of looking at is the corner plaza and corner parks. And these really can be, much more active in sort of large scale, let's say retail areas or mixed use zones. They may be more passive at kind of residential areas where you don't want as many people sort of hanging out or gathering, but these small scale interventions can really, make a difference in terms of public realm at residential areas. And, really the sort of sky's the limit in terms of available land on, how small or large these are. And this would be an example of something that's more like a park sort of on the street edge or the corner. And, what we're sort of showing here is not to necessarily suggest this would be an exact design, but is really just a hypothetical kind of area that you get a fairly wide setback. You could use it, for seating if there's retail. It could be sort of a performance space. It could be, a space for art or other sort of uses that, there could be a lot really sort of going on. And really looking at how that sort of addresses the street edge and how it kind of livens up the street edge and interfaces with the building. Really thinking about how the architecture sort of interacts with these spaces is important, and how that, the architecture would sort of define or shape, these spaces or sort of frame it. I'm going to jump to the next slide. And then looking at sort of smaller scale interventions that you could look at say residential areas or areas where there just isn't as big of a project to have as large of a park or plaza, but just simply sort of popping out the curbs and creating sort of small scale gathering seating or other areas, provide an opportunity for sort of more intimate kind of seating on a smaller scale. And just some examples of that. And then, there's a lot of sort of variations on this and a lot of different things you can do. And, cities have been dealing with corner plazas, and this really can, relate quite well to redevelopment or even existing areas if you're able to kind of take over an area that may actually have some additional sort of space at the corner. These are just some examples of projects and ways that they've dealt with their corner situations. The third typology we wanted to talk about was the idea of the linear park, and really thinking about this in terms of, these can be kind of long, narrow areas, but they can actually be wider. Downtown currently, they're doing a lot of the Green Street concepts that have been, and they're starting to implement those, and most of those are done in as little as a 15-foot sort of minimum setback from the sidewalk. So it doesn't necessarily require a lot of space, but it surely can expand to that, which actually provides for, for more flexibility and a lot more use of spaces. And you can think of this from being sort of active to passive as well too, that these things could have, fitness circuits or, other things in them as well too, or they could be more sort of urban trails or connectors, much like the normal street promenade. And then really thinking about how we sort of interface these with mobility is going to be really important as we start to look at mobility in the upcoming months. And just a couple examples of showing, how artwork, sort of lawn areas that can be used for yoga or fitness, seating, potentially looking at double rows of trees to create sort of a nice kind of green urban environment or sidewalk in these conditions, or just some quick sort of examples that we're highlighting here. And then here's some built examples that actually show that these things, they can be, sort of narrow or short if, they're, as space allows, and it can continue to be developed or flexed. The image in the middle is in Santa Monica and shows kind of it's roughly about a 1,500-foot long sort of area that's about 25 feet wide that really is sort of a long park that just has a little bit of everything kind of in it, but it's all done in a very narrow space. Just sort of looking at areas that, might have recreation or other components to this, and a lot of sort of landscape, so that, there's really quite a few things you can do in sort of a narrow space. And other examples, kind of even like Tweet Street Park downtown and Cortez Hill, it's kind of a linear edge along the 5 freeway, for those of you familiar with that example. And then these are just some ground level shots. Again, the one on the left is in Santa Monica, and then the one on the right is in San Francisco, utilizing these narrow spaces for a variety of uses. The fourth kind of public realm typology is the Paseo, and typically these are mid-block, and thinking about these as either they can be connectors, or they could be sort of program areas that are sort of surrounded or related to a building, and they may also connect to sort of larger parks or plazas that may come off of this. So you really could see these as sort of connectors of open spaces as well too. And the community really actually has some good examples of this. If you want to jump to the next slide, and these can be sort of small scale interventions. Let's see if the switch is here. Oh, yep, sorry. We have a few examples here, I guess, first of, these things could be activated for, street fair or street art. They could be, related to sort of, retail buildings or residential buildings. They may also just be sort of linear connectors. So this is kind of showing, more on the large end or scale of things. If you want to jump to the next slide, that, really has a pretty wide or generous setback. But jumping to the next slide, some of the examples of this that kind of already exist in the neighborhood are the very intimate sort of small scale spaces, like on the left along Fifth Avenue that leads back to, a few of the businesses and shops there. There's a kind of a mini courtyard. So these kind of surprise opportunities are really kind of nice, and maybe an opportunity to create a connection to like the village and the center photo, which really does open up to a lot of shops and restaurants. And even looking at One Mission over in Mission Hills off of Washington Streets, next to Farmer Bottega, has sort of a residential and kind of commercial mix, and there's sort of a cut through in these blocks. The next kind of typology we're talking about or looking at is pocket parks, and these can be sort of really small scale in terms of utilizing leftover parking spaces or portions of parking lots. So they could be something as small really as 2,000, 2,500 square feet, and essentially the city nomenclature for pocket parks or mini parks really goes up to 3 acres before you start hitting that neighborhood park designation. So the scale can really vary quite a bit on this. But really, these provide an opportunity to do infill on smaller lots or parking lots. You could even sort of use some of the smaller parcels in terms of being able to get a lot and actually convert it or turn it to a park. And it could be a mix of uses within a area, or sort of single uses within these pocket park areas. And you'd want to really tailor that to sort of the specific location. And this shows, a little example of sort of mixing, it could be community gardens with play and seating. It just shows how sort of a 30-foot wide lot can really sort of, pack a lot in. If you want to jump to the next one, and just showing alternate views of sort of seating, play, and community gardens. That really, the other trick here is making sure that all the open space that we're doing sort of works and functions for a variety of users, that we want this to be universally accessible. We want it to also be sort of all ages from, younger children all the way up to sort of, seniors, and making sure that we're finding the right mix of uses for everybody to really feel like they're getting ownership and usage out of these park locations. And then jumping to just some examples showing Smart Farms, which is one of the community farms in downtown, as well as sort of a temporary plaza that happened in a parking lot that was done by New School of Architecture students, where they kind of took over a space and created a small little pocket park just to kind of transform part of East Village. Next slide shows the opportunity for sort of nature play or kids play, and trying to create some more sort of softer landscape spaces within the park, or even sort of the community garden with some seating and some small play on the right, kind of as a good mix of uses of these pocket park type ideas.
Thanks, Brad. I thought I would take a few minutes to just go over a few things that are, since there was a lot of interest in the joint use park concept, in which we share space with schools. There's a couple of them in our community, one at Birney here that I'm showing, another one at Roosevelt Middle School, just north of Balboa Park at Park Boulevard there. But also we have a couple, including Florence Elementary School in the community plan already as a potential joint use facility, as well as one at Grant School that includes the possible use of the gymnasium as part of the joint use over there, just at the edge of Uptown in Mission Hills. And then one last concept I wanted to throw out there is that I think the community really has a lot of capacity for more urban forest and more urban greening opportunity. As you can see here from the map, where the cover occurs in the community, and the bullet points that read here that in 2020, as of now, we're doing pretty well at 15%, almost meeting that goal in the cap, and the cap goal of 35% in 2035 is something I want to kind of have us kind of look at a little bit further on in the process and see where there's areas of improvement. And with that, I think I'd hand it over to Michael to see where we can go with the next part of the presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. We kind of went through a lot there. Really appreciate all the graphics and sort of the breakdown by typology. But you know, we're still fairly early in this process, and we wanted to, at the last meeting, we talked about opportunities for public space within the right of way, specifically, you know, at parking spaces and sort of utilizing those for outdoor dining or potentially more active opportunities. Here, we really wanted to explore some opportunities for public realm between the curb and the building frontage, but also just sort of everywhere in terms of looking at alleys and sort of other larger sites that could also provide more public space access. So a couple of key questions that we wanted to lead off for the conversation are sort of like, what are the key community needs and what would be a good fit given some of these typologies, and what we should look to emphasize as we look towards developing our public space and mobility recommendations, and then ultimately our land use recommendations. And so what wouldn't be a good fit in terms of things that we should potentially de-emphasize as we look for potential policy changes and recommendations through that process. And then finally, you know, where do you think these are needed most? Obviously, we know that you know, the survey, and we've heard from you in terms of the key priorities being the core of Hillcrest, and then, you know, expanding from the normal street promenade. And so it's really just having a discussion about sort of the key locations within the community that that we should, you know, really take a look at and emphasize as we're going through this process. This is not to state that we're not going to try and look for opportunities everywhere, but it, you know, looking at sort of from this subcommittee and the people who are attending tonight, sort of what are the major points of emphasis. With that, I'll turn it over to the chair. I know there have been a number of chats in here, and we can go through some of these, you know, if you'd like, Mr. Chair, but I'll turn it over to you for right now.
I have one thing before we open it up for discussion. On these private space opportunities that were shown, what does the planning department have in terms of rules for developers in terms of providing these? Is this just an encouragement, or are there rules that they have to provide it under certain circumstances? What's the current mode of operation that you've had at the planning department?
I can take that. Really good question, Roy. It varies depending on the project, right? Sometimes what we have in the past encouraged folks to do is to not just pay the fee, right? And we may or may not get a park where the project is, and we may not get a full park in the past. So we're open to a development team providing their park on site or partial credit on site. That said, it's a public park with public access, and it has to be designed and programmed through the Council Policy 633, which is a public process, which includes at least 3 public meeting charrettes, a lot like this, right? And then it goes to a recommendation to Parks and Rec. So there's another public process that it goes through there. And then the general development plan for that public park on private land, if you will, then gets built. And oftentimes it's maintained by the development team. Sometimes they find a piece of parcel that they want to give to the city as a parcel, and then the city takes that over. So it can go either way. Hope I answered your question.
It's helpful. All right, so I wanted to open it up first to the public, non-committee members who were watching the presentation, and see what they have, what their response to it is. Go with the non-committee first.
Tom has his hand. Oh, Tom.
He's on the committee. And yeah. Lou, go ahead.
Well, it's great to see all these ideas for parks, and I want to particularly applaud the really active ones. You know, when it seems so long ago that we traveled, but I remember the last time I was in Europe, really noticing the parks, walking around, how they mixed, as we talked about, generational things. So there would be an innovative kind of play structure, but the really active things like community gardens, like ping pong tables, like bocce courts, like mixed with things like unusual, rather than having a play yard that's all about the typical school structures set in a park, instead having unusual little installations for children. I'm really interested in all these ideas, but it's a little abstract, and I have a few specific concerns that I hope that you might be able to address, and I'll try to say them really quickly. One is, of course, issues that we have all over the city and in our community, maybe in particular, that have to do with issues with maintenance, and the use of the parks by people for whom they weren't intended, or in ways that they were not intended, and how you might have, what lessons you've learned that might help you to address that. The other is, I'm a little concerned that it's like, this is about new developers giving us a piece, a corner, a median, a little bit as a price for development, as opposed to inventorying what's in the community now and what are available spaces. Someone just mentioned in the chat that little improvised dog park over by the 163 Robinson. And I'm also wondering, I mean, some of these are really fun ideas, and we've all experienced them when we've gone to other places, things like little alleys, but our alleys seem to be pretty functional. Like, I don't know if, what I'd be interested in seeing is sort of block by block inventory. We walked, and this is what's realistic in terms of who owns it, how it's being used currently, what uses it needs to have, and to be honest, what are some of the potential problems with it? No one can be opposed to green space and play space and community space, but what's realistic, and should it all have to be, well, we tear something down and build something new and then get a little wedge from a developer in exchange for giving them some other offset? Thanks.
Thank you. So any other non-committee members would like to speak up before we open up to the subcommittee?
Yeah, I have, and I think Matt Wallstrom, I noticed in the chat, there's people that have raised their hands. So I have a couple questions as well. One of the things that was mentioned was the mixed use development, and an example that was used was Village Hillcrest. When that project was brought on board, part of the requirement was that a certain amount of space had to be devoted to residential use. Now, Village Hillcrest, I'm sure some of you might know, some of you might not know. On the Fifth Avenue side, there is retail space on the first floor, followed by residential and commercial space on the second floor. Now, that residential space has not been used as residential space for quite some time, even though that was one of the requirements, some of the give and take that was given to the developer for that property. So how is the city going to enforce or make sure that those requirements are maintained in the future? And B, how is it enforcing those special uses now? Second question, the Uptown district, the hub, the residential units there have a space between the various buildings that is currently being used as a fire lane. And in my opinion, it's a missed opportunity for a green space. So I'd really like to kind of learn more how those types of projects would be envisioned, while still providing for the fire lane, but allowing that to be more of a green space use, and something that the public can use, because right now there's no trespassing signs, so it's not really friendly or conducive to the public to be able to enjoy the space. And then I forgot what my last question was. I should have written that down, but I think that's it for now.
Thanks, Eddie. Sharon, you had something you wanted to say? You're,
Okay, two things. We were talking about examples from Europe, and I noticed in Moscow, the urban parks there, they had park employees who were at the park who would get out play equipment for children or supplies like after school. Children would go to the park for a certain period of time and they'd get out equipment for the children. And this also meant having park employees at the park meant you got more use out of the land, you could do more things with it, and it was safer. You had supervision. And Gorky Park, I was thinking of on the weekend, I guess, in the evening. It's a long linear park, of course, next to a river. And you had multiple activities for various groups all along it. And it was fantastic how much use they got out of it, how many people were there. So second point, we're talking about parks for people. So it's important to remember to put the densities next to the park so people will actually use it. That's the second park. You have the park, but you need people or they're dead. So it's important to put the densities there and to allow people to live near the parks. And so when we talk about housing, remember that. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other non-committee members? Carol?
Sorry, I remembered what my last question was. In regards to use of the alleyways, one of the things that just before COVID that we had attempted to do was we were looking at an artist bazaar in one of the alleys. However, because of the width of the alleys in Hillcrest, there was some limits on where those spaces could be closed off, primarily because of the need for it to be used as a fire lane. When in your presentation, those alleys were brought up, and so how would that space be used if there's still a requirement to have that as a fire lane? And that's it.
Roy, I
Carol?
have a question.
Carol was up.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to know what kind of budget you have. What are you thinking you have in terms of money to do anything? And then if that, in addition to that, somebody mentioned an inventory of all of the alleys, all of the possible places. That's a great idea. So I hope that idea can be implemented. Thank you.
Mary?
Yeah, thanks, Roy. I mentioned it in the chat, but I'm going to mention it out loud. In the typologies that you all have described, which I really appreciate. I appreciate the visuals very much, so thank you for that. But I didn't see anything about community gardens. And I mentioned, and I don't know how it happened, I know nothing about the creation of it, but the International Rescue Committee has taken over a parcel on 30th Avenue in North Park, right next to a church, where they're using it as sort of a learning experience and entrepreneurship experience for refugees. I have no idea who owns it, no idea who tends, well, they tend it. But I also know community gardens can be very popular, and I didn't see that anywhere in your stuff. Just a comment.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak before we turn it over to the subcommittee to get their...
Yeah, Roy. Michael Donovan.
Go ahead.
Couple of comments. One of the things I've noticed as we've begun to break down the front walls of the restaurants and move them out onto the street is it's kind of luck of the draw as to whether you actually have space where you can extend out and provide service on the streets. We need to think a lot more about, if we're going to continue that, about where we can put shared space to allow people to either go to multiple restaurants, pick up food and then eat together, or to have a place where those other restaurants can reserve some space so that they can continue to do business or at least offer that amenity. So the second thing is really about amenities. As we're thinking about outdoor space, some things that become very important in making it useful are things like public Wi-Fi, toilets. I know I live next door to an empty building, and the homeless use it frequently. We need to find a way to give them a place to go so that it doesn't end up all over the parks. Need to think about, sorry, I write too small. Where can we safely park bicycles and scooters and those kinds of things? There are in some of the lots, for example, Village Hillcrest, some good bicycle racks where they're in a location that might be watched by a business. Where can we put safe bicycle parking and scooter parking? And then lastly, plugs. How do we provide power for people who may choose to work or hang out, read, or do some other recreational activity in these pocket parks and plazas?
He's breaking up for me. I don't know about anybody else.
Last comment in the chat.
Yeah, we're losing you, Michael. It's one of the things about Zoom meetings.
Yeah. Michael, can you try killing your video to see if that gives you a clearer signal?
In one of your presentations, there was a comment in one of the previous presentations about the fact that there's not any. Happy to try that.
That's a little better, but you're still breaking up on us.
There was a comment in a prior briefing. Oh no.
You can also, Michael, you could also make a comment in the comment section, and that actually the city will have those comments and those will go on the record. So that's probably good there. All right.
I have a question.
Sure.
Hi, I'm not a resident of Uptown, but I'm very interested in it. I've lived in San Diego 45 years. I've seen Hillcrest morph and change, some good, some bad. But I have a question. The overall intent of the public realm, the public spaces, is there an overarching 90-foot thousand theme for it? Is it to say in my chat, is it a continuum of the utilization of the spaces from when you're 20 to when you're 40, single, maybe get coupled, maybe get a family, maybe age in place? Is that the idea of these public spaces, that they're available and usable by the complete demographic of youth to, hate to say it, to death, but to aging? And if so, how does that fit into the stream of the planning and the design? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else before we go to the subcommittee? All right, subcommittee members, hopefully you've been listening to all these comments, and now I will turn it over to subcommittee. Tom, you had your hand up early. I'll let you go first.
Yes, I do. Thank you. So I recall that in 2016, the planning department came up with a new zoning map, and that was implemented. And as I remember, the zoning was quite flexible, quite generous to an applicant. I believe CC 3-9 zoning allows 0 setbacks in the front and unlimited height. CC 3-8 is also a zone that affects a lot of Hillcrest. Michael, do you recall what the setback is for CC 3-8?
I don't. Let me look it up.
Okay, so what I want to caution the committee about is in the past, if it's true that we gave applicants huge amount of latitude in what they can build and very little in place of requirements, we have a tough job trying to get back even a 20-foot sidewalk, let alone an area that's maybe 25 feet wide and allows for some tables and so forth. So that's going to be a challenge, and I'm definitely looking for Michael and the planning department to come up with some creative ideas on that. Once you give a developer unlimited height and zero setback, and that's in the zoning, it's kind of hard to negotiate for public space.
Yeah, so the setback requirement is the same as CC 39.
So zero
minimum requirement in the 3A. So,
well, Michael, maybe you could just address that briefly now. If large parts of Hillcrest are zoned with zero front setback, how will we get any of these nice spaces that Scott and Brad just showed us?
So there's a couple of things to include. One is that the proposed amendment will include land use designations and rezoning, possibly. So the zones that are there today are not necessarily the zones that we will implement going forward. The new mixed use zones do require linear parks for larger lots. So that's something that could be considered in moving from the community commercial zones to the mixed use zones, which have been recently implemented. Additionally, there's other opportunities there's currently the community plan implementation overlay zone that could either be modified to, address setbacks or other, design requirements that help achieve public space. So those are all things that we are going to evaluate sort of in the coming months. So we really wanted to focus on the typologies tonight to sort of see what works, what doesn't, what needs to be focused on. But your point is well taken in terms of the what the current requirements are and how that has the potential for us to sort of address public space through redevelopment on these lots by property owners and developers. Scott, I don't know if there's something you wanted to add on to that.
Yeah, I just wanted to let everyone know that we're not totally immersed in only trying to get from the development of redevelopment parks. And then if there's any other locations that anybody has for possible parcels, we've touched on briefly, I think Brad touched on what are now parking lots, what are sites, because, I don't want to get into it too much because in the coming year we'll be also processing in a public way the Parks Master Plan strategies. But part of the Parks Master Plan strategy is that there would be a new parks fee that would be separate from other things. And so that parks fee wouldn't have folks robbing from it for other uses that are not parks. And the parks fees would probably be gathering slightly higher park fees than in current. So not to say that there would not be parks fee that would be used conceivably for areas of need. And that's the other focus of the Parks Master Plan, providing parks where there's need. And as our community plan clearly states, we're in need of public open space and parks. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to stress that we're not just talking about what we can wring out of the development industry in terms of parts of their development parcels.
Okay, Matt, you had a question. You had a comment next.
Yeah, I know Michael spoke to a lot of the issues here is having to do with rezoning and trying to create a whole new structure, and that's what we're here for, to kind of have that discussion. I think everything that was presented here today, all of the ideas, linear park, corner parks, every case that you presented, I think all have a good place in future planning through this plan. I think the key piece to it all is the how. It's all about how do we incentivize the developer to come in and do this and work with us. And that's really going to be something that we need to bring, some of our public officials in on, I think, to some of these meetings to start to talk about the how, Because we can lay out this great plan, but unless the incentives are going to be there to bring people in to start to work and structure this, we definitely don't have the public dollars to do it, but we might have enough public incentives to be able to push us over the top to kind of start to motivate, you know, some of this restructuring. So that was one thing. I did want to reiterate, I think it was Lou who mentioned things like more grown-up based parks as well, and have those thoughts in mind, like the sports. And I always kind of go back to thinking about Boston's North End, kind of I grew up, that is a vibrant life. It really can bring out the older populations, the seniors, and an active environment. We don't really have a lot of that in San Diego. I think there's a lot of positives that can come of that. And then I also want to bring in, because I believe community centers still fall under the park space, and that was not something that was mentioned here. And, you know, one of the things that, you know, long-term I'd like to see is, you know, as we look toward the restructuring of the DMV site specifically as a big public space where we might be able to do something where we could create a mixed use community center space out of the DMV property, where we can really incorporate a whole lot of these issues right in the central hub of those key areas that would then the normal street and perfect connection gathering space for a lot of folks across both Hillcrest and Uptown. So I think those are the types of things that we can kind of integrate together. But yeah, it's trying to figure out how to get the tax dollars or the public and private dollars to work jointly on these things is really going to be the hardest task, or else we're just spinning our wheels here and not going to get anywhere on this except to put a new plan on paper. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Who's next? Yeah, Clint, go ahead.
Thanks. I'll probably end up echoing some of what Matt was just saying. I think my key theme from all this is just ownership and how this is going to be financed and paid for in the long term. I think that the notion of improving the park fees is good. I guess I'd be curious on that specifically. Are we talking about capital funds? Are we talking about operations dollars? And those are two very different types of pots. We know from experience that when the city budget gets tough, it's a lot easier to cut park staff than it is to cut police and firefighters. And so, you know, what guarantees are there moving forward that, you know, these parks will be adequately maintained and funded? I'm a big fan. I shouldn't say a big fan. I have mixed feelings about it, actually. I like the concept when it's done well with private ownership of public spaces. But I do think there's some abdication of the public responsibility that I don't necessarily love in that setup. But I do think some big cities on the East Coast, New York, DC, have done a really great job of using private atriums and other spaces in the public realm. And so I'd really like to see, I guess where this all comes down to is like, what is the long-term financing plan of how do we make this work? In terms of, you know, bringing private money to the table and private land to the table, as well as public land, and how do we finance all that? And I guess it would be interesting from my perspective of, you know, there's 4 different parks that I wrote down here that all are sort of, to me, kind of case studies of what works and doesn't work in the city of San Diego. So in terms of the activation of a public space, like why is Plaza Familia working so well? And why is Horton Plaza a disaster? And, you know, similarly, in terms of public parks, you know, when we were talking earlier about security, the waterfront park, the new city or the county building park had a lot of paid security at first. And I don't know, I kind of had mixed feelings about it. In some ways it was nice, but in some ways it was a little bit over the top versus the new Savita Park, which is absolutely beautiful. And, you know, there isn't any real presence of security there, and kind of what's the right middle ground there and what can work in Hillcrest. And then finally, I have maybe 2 more points. One, there's a couple of people mentioned in the chats, bathrooms. I think those are critically important. If you look again at like Savita or Waterfront Park, both those have public bathrooms, and I think those are an absolute necessity where they can be put in. And then, you know, a couple of folks have mentioned in the public chat online, you know, about conditional use permits and covenants and ensuring those are enforced. I do think that is super important that folks who do get special grants have some financial liability associated with maintaining and enforceability for maintaining those covenants into the future that can either put money back into the city coffers if they renege on them, or keeping them maintained moving forward. So a lot of this just comes down to, you'll hear this from me throughout, Michael, as we get into different components of this, but like, what is the financing plan for parks, for infrastructure? How are we going to pay for this? And, how are we going to keep these things maintained into the future? And what incentives can we use to do that? Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Clint.
Yes, thanks. Who else wants to speak? Amy, go ahead.
Awesome. Thanks, Roy. So I have a few questions and some suggestions. With regard to trying to find public spaces where we can add some park opportunities, have you guys done any kind of inventory of the wide streets? I mean, just thinking of linear parks, is that something that you guys have thought about in that area to be able to kind of capitalize on those opportunities? And then this kind of goes back to what Lou was saying in terms of inventorying these opportunities. I recognize it's difficult to walk down a street and identify who's putting their property up for sale, but there's a lot of surface parking lots in Hillcrest, and I mean that's prime park opportunities. So perhaps you can kind of marry these surface parking lots with adjacent developers and work in some sort of public-private opportunity to gain additional park space that, yes, maybe the city's to take care of, but overall that's something that we need, and there is that opportunity there if we can kind of connect those pieces now. Another comment too, just similar to affordable housing, I think it's good to be able to intersperse these public spaces throughout the community, not just collect them all in one area or, all of the new developments, but larger spaces, smaller spaces. I recognize that it's difficult to require developers to include something like this, but I think it's important to highly incentivize that once a project gets to a certain size. And it seems that you're already kind of picking up on that to some degree and trying to do that. Just looking through my notes to see if I have anything else to really say. I really liked the public Wi-Fi space idea. I mean, this is common throughout a lot of other countries where they do that in larger plazas and stuff. And then kind of tagging on to what Clint was saying about the financial end of this, especially if we are going to rely on developers, then we need to look a little bit more at how we're going to incentivize this. And I think it's really important that the city be able to maintain some of a piece of this and try and push for some public-private partnerships for some of these spaces. I think that's very important to ensure that it is for the community and not just for the development that's there. There's a comment in the chat about some private public space that he didn't even know was a public space. So I mean, when it's a private development, unless it's really accessible to the public, it's kind of hard to know if you're allowed to go there. It's not like they often advertise those things. And then the last just question I have is, would a larger maintenance assessment district be part of the answer to this? And with that, I will turn it back over.
Thanks, Amy. Barrera, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Can I interject just for a second before Barrera talks?
All right.
Just to answer Amy's question specifically. So, well, there were a number of questions and comments, and obviously thank you and thank everybody. But I wanted to sort of hit on the inventory specifically. So we do have the existing conditions atlas, which has an inventory a lot of the current conditions as it relates to land use, urban design, and mobility. The atlas itself, to my knowledge, does not have an explicit inventory of sort of the width or number of alleys, though that's something that we could certainly build upon and bring back at either the mobility meeting in January or when we talk again about public space in March of 2021, which is coming up very soon. So I just wanted to hit on that in terms of, we do have we do have that analysis and that inventory, and there are some parking lots available, but it is a relatively small percentage of the area when you take that as a whole. But just wanted to mention that as well. Sorry, I'll stop talking. Go ahead, Breer. My apologies.
That's okay. Thanks, Michael and Brad and the other staff that presented that. That was very interesting. I just had before I make my comments, I wanted to, see if you could clarify what sort of input you're looking for. I don't, maybe I missed it, but I don't think I'm clear. Are you looking for suggestions for things in addition to what you presented, or locations for things that you presented, or is there some criteria that for the feedback you're looking to get from the public?
This is Scott. Both those, all the above. If there's places that you can think of that we didn't mention, we could certainly pull up the map, or whatever we need to do to find out, where those might be. And anything, that you have questions about, like, are alleys really, we need to look at those more closely, like someone said, or any of that kind of feedback.
Okay, because you presented some really great specific examples. And so, I was really excited about a lot of them. And so I'm supportive of everything you showed. But, just to comment on kind of the larger topic of public realm, when I think about that, I think about it as being more than just parks. I think of it as our roads and sidewalks and every other space that we can access. And when I think about the character of that, I think that changing that is going to require looking at all of these spaces in a much broader sense and not being so specific about trying to make small interventions, because I don't think those are going to change the overall experience of being in the neighborhood. While I think pocket parks are fantastic, I think things like linear greenways make a much bigger impact to how we experience our neighborhood and how much we enjoy it, particularly with respect to, access to nature, which sometimes walking through the middle of Hillcrest, I find a hard time connecting with, which seems weird since we're so close to the park. We have so many canyons. The pedestrian experience is really pretty brutal. And I think that those of you who know me probably know I'll say this, but I think that part of changing the character of the public realm is transitioning from a fast-moving auto-oriented space into a more pedestrian and active transportation type of space. You talked about the temporary dining areas and the possibility of making these kind of communal areas. I think that's a fantastic idea, specifically for, as mentioned before, some restaurants didn't win the lottery on having parking in front of their place. So having these places is much more equitable and fair, I think, than just having, them available for those who can afford the permits and afford the construction. Pho on 5th, for example, I spoke to the owner of that restaurant, and he wasn't really sure they were going to do it because of the cost and hassle, whereas their neighbor has done it. So there's some inequity there based on the success and wealth of the business. I would love to see us expand some of the activities available in the public room, like you mentioned, it, public exercise space. This is great. I ride and jog in the street. People improvise exercise space wherever they can at the moment. So thinking of ways to expand on the ability to do that is a brilliant idea. And I just have a comment about one more thing about public spaces. I think that a neighborhood like Hillcrest is lacking in a real central public gathering space. And, I've said this before, there are a number of large parking lots that would be perfect for a public square type development. Obviously, how that would happen, I don't know. That's not what I'm concerned about right now. But to really achieve something like what Clint mentioned about the Plaza Familia would require, a central location, businesses to activate it, programming to make it interesting. And I think that the benefit to the neighborhood, aside from just entertainment and performances, would be an opportunity to have a space where we can go out and exercise, what's become one of our most popular public activities, protest, right? being able to get outside and speak or hear our local electeds talk. I mean, and also one other thing, these small spaces that you're talking about, whether they're pocket parks or large public spaces or communal eating spaces, you know, we need a way for not only for people to access them actively and on foot, but for a way for them to store their bikes and their micromobility objects. We have a problem with theft, and really the only way to counteract that is to have more secure parking options for small vehicles and not just cars. And I'll stop there to let other people talk, but I may raise my hand again. Thanks a lot.
That was great. I just wanted to, and I like pretty much all the questions and subjects that you raised. And also I wanted to say that I really like this discussion of well, okay, how do we do some of these things, and how some of the ideas you have are really interesting to hear about. And the character of a community and neighborhood really is changed by the infrastructure that's in the public right of way. Familiar with, I don't know, many of you are familiar with Fern Street as it goes south from Grape Street. Like 25 years ago, I worked on a project there to just find places in the public right of way to put a continuous row that runs for 6 or so blocks of tipu trees. And over the 20 years where the trees now touch the canopy of the street, it's a completely different street. Just interventions like that. So please go ahead.
All right, who have we not heard from? Go ahead, Zach.
All right, I just had a question on joint use agreements and the process for that, as well as particular lots for like a public-private partnership. Does the you know, in the plan Hillcrest, are we able to make a, you know, show a preference for lots in the future, or show a preference for a joint use agreement with a school? Is that within our purview?
Yes, we in the planning department, we liaise with the school district, and it really is, you know, we're talking about earlier funding challenges, right? So one of the benefits of a joint use facility is that in these play all day facilities, as they're sometimes called, or joint use with schools, the school district will pay for these facilities if the city agrees to maintain it as the best we can. So yes, we can talk to the school districts and find out, you know, what their schedule is for these things. And joint uses occur with schools, but they can, you know, now's the time to think big. Or are there other places that we can joint use with other schools than just the San Diego City of San Diego School District?
Thank you very much. You know, I really think that those are more of where we should think when we think of traditional parks. I'm more like really what we were talking about today with pocket parks and linear parks for really being more multifunctional areas. Loved the ideas of the communal dining, places for public seating, and being able to work as well, and really keeping people coming and going. I think, you know, when it comes to more open space, more being out in environment, save that more for those larger parks where we can have some sort of joint agreement with a school, or with some sort of connection to the canyons, which I feel like are totally underutilized. I really think when we're talking about these pocket parks or these linear parks, that they should be, as I said, as multifunctional as possible. But also, I don't know if there is this ability, it could be very tricky, but to possibly make them modular. So that you can have some sort of pop-up event, some sort of, you know, there's the Hillcrest Farmers Market, but if you wanted to have more of an art show, or if you wanted to have public music there, that you would be able to move some things aside, maybe get a permit, and then have something to really bring the public there. bring something for people to want to sit there and dine for. Not certain if there's any project like that in the city of San Diego, but love to see something like that where it's easily able to change to the environment or for whatever is going on there.
There's a similar something like that in Courtyard in the East Village. It's a bit like that. They have a stage that's set, but parts of that park can be moved around.
And then just last note to touch on, I know I'm touching on a lot here, but public bathrooms, and I know Mary McKenzie emphasized making sure that they're really accessible. I hear constantly and read too much on Nextdoor about people complaining about public urination, defecation. If you want that to stop, you got to give people the opportunity to be able to go. And so really, as well as say, if you want a family to be able to stay, they're out having a good time with their kids at some sort of park, they've got to be able to go. So with that, I'll yield. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Was there any other subcommittee member that I missed so far? All right. I'll share a couple of thoughts as well. So during the plan update that we did for the whole community, for all of Uptown, we did a subcommittee that was focused only on parks, and we tried to identify where our deficits were and where we could put parkland. And for the most part, it was very hard to find options in Hillcrest that wouldn't be so expensive that they wouldn't be considered. We threw out ideas of buying, land when it came available and making little pocket parks, but it didn't seem too practical for the areas that we're talking about in Hillcrest. The one exception, of course, is what we've been able to accomplish on Normal Street. But that was not accomplished easy, and that was not accomplished in a quick time frame. That was identified in the previous plan update. So it's 30 years in the making. And it took identifying money from a bunch of different sources to get it to actually happen, including the parking committee that chipped in quite a bit of money that I'm also on. And the bike lane stuff, and that's been an opportunity, and it's also been a challenge, and it's an ongoing thing, and we haven't point in how it's going to work out. So it could be our opportunity to work in my mind. So hopefully that the city, as far as the time I heard, they still need to find additional funding. It's very expensive when the city gets involved in these kinds of projects. So for the rest of you members of the committee, the price tag, when you finally see it, will be in the millions. So but it's also an opportunity for our community to coalesce around an open space, a place for people to do a lot of the things that were mentioned by some of the other people in the room, in terms of gathering, in terms of street nightlife activity and stuff like that. My hope would be that when the parcels adjacent to that are redeveloped, that they will accent that, and anything we can do in the code that sort of does the kind of thing that you see in Little Italy, I think is where we have to be focused. Really, you do have to get the developers involved in a lot of this. And I don't know whether it's through rules or agreements or however you do it, but if they don't get involved, it won't work. And if it doesn't work, then their value of their land won't be as much as it should be. So hopefully they can be cajoled to participate and incorporate some of these wonderful pictures that were shown in the presentation. That's my comments. All right, we have used up our time. We have a couple of minutes if anybody has anything that's critical. Michael, do you want to give us a closing thing?
Sure. Can you pull up the presentation, Scott? Just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and for dedicating your time to these meetings. We received a lot of good input, and there's a lot of work that we will go back and do and look at specific, opportunities and sites and implementation strategies that we can share with the group.
Can you, Michael,
and
make me allow me to?
Oh
share?
yeah, did you get out?
I got knocked off for a while. Thank you for technology.
All right, sorry about that. I want to hit on a couple of things just real quick. There's one thing that Matt Wallstrom specifically asked in terms of urban trail and whether that's defined whether that's clearly defined. We don't have a formal definition for urban trail in the community plan or in the general plan. However, the way that we sort of envision this and some of the discussion that we've had is that we have a lot of, major public spaces and access to canyons, and how do we link those? The Midway Community Plan identifies linear parks and urban pathways that really are multi-use for both pedestrians and bicyclists, connecting our urban areas to our open space areas. And so we would look to really build on that. If we need to provide a formal definition, we can do so through that process. But I think that's really ultimately what we're looking to do, is how do we utilize the right of way that we have to better get people to where they want to go. And helping to sort of create more livable and better public spaces. We hear you on the financing and needing to address the financial issues. There are some things that are going to be out of our purview, but there are certain things that we can address through this process. Obviously looking at opportunities for, other examples in alleys and how those actually get implemented, because they are utilized for service entrances or garages or deliveries. So all of those things would need to be, addressed in terms of programming for things other than that. And then just really looking at linear greenways and how we can sort of implement those moving through this process. And then, the one other thing I did want to touch on was Mr. Kaminsky's point about sort of how do we design this, and it is intended to be designed for everyone. We don't anticipate that these would be sort of, age specific public spaces, but looking at creating amenities that are designed for everyone, because Hillcrest has a breadth of ages in the demographic. It's not just young families, and it's not just seniors, it's everyone. That's a lot of rambling for me. So let's, we're getting close to 8 o'clock, and we'll go on to next steps. So again, what we want to do is take the input we received tonight. Everything will be thrown up on the website. So the people who weren't here, or for those of you who absolutely are dying to go back and listen to this again, it will be on the website, and then we'll also post the chat log as well. We will then refine those public space opportunities and concepts and look at, creating more specific graphics and relating those to the existing framework within the Hillcrest area. We're continuing work on the other aspects of the focused amendment itself, these including the context statement for the LGBTQ+ cultural and historical resources work. We're working on the preliminary mobility concepts and opportunities, looking at pedestrian, transit, and bicycle and vehicle access in the area. That will be coming up in January, and then developing our urban form concepts that sort of interrelate between mobility and public space. Next slide. So for the, just looking at the schedule of meetings that we have at the January meeting, it'll be mobility focused, and our mobility staff and consultant team will be taking the lead in presenting opportunities and preliminary concepts there. February, we'll discuss urban design and building form. And then in March, we'll come back and talk about refined public space concepts and park opportunities. And I'll just check one. There's a fairly lengthy chats in here, and so I don't think I will address anything else on that right now. Next slide, please. As always, here's our contact information. Shannon was unable to attend tonight, but both her and I are always available. You can send emails to us, and then anything related to the project we share with the full team. And you can view all the presentations and documents at planhillcrest.org. I will echo what Matt wrote in the chat. Happy New Year. Have a safe and happy holidays to everyone. Thank you all for spending your time with us. And that's all I have to say for tonight. I'll turn it back to the chair.
Yep. Okay. I guess motion to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you. everyone.
Discretion, yeah.
Yes. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Happy holidays, everybody. Thank you. Great meeting. Really interesting.
Happy holidays.
Bye,
all.
everyone.
Take care.
Thank you.
See
Wear a
ya.
mask.
Bye.
Thank you for the
Stay
feedback.
Yep.
Don't gather.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you, Scott.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good
Happy
presentation.
holidays. Happy holidays to you, Mary and Gail.
Yes.
You.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Gail, happy holidays.